Hi, I'm Danny. I'm a musician and a woodworker, and I like to build guitars out of mostly reclaimed materials. For the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to show you how I built this beautiful Telecaster style guitar out of some discarded mahogany door trim. So let's get started. First thing I needed to do was get all of these thin strips of mahogany door trim into the form of a body blank, roughly 22 inches by 15 inches by 2 inches. The biggest issue I have in getting there is the fact that the cross section of these boards is not rectangular. When looked at from the end, they're roughly trapezoidal. But the good thing about that is they're all the same size and shape. So when flipped in opposite orientations, two of them sandwiched together does create one rectangular board. So the plan is to make enough of those rectangles stacked against one another to form a large slab from which I can make a body blank. There's also two grooves milled into the back of each piece of trim that needs to be removed so that all the pieces fit flat up against each other with no voids or empty spaces visible between them. So I'm using my 6-inch jointer to mill off the groove portion of these boards. Once both sides of all my boards are flattened smooth, I apply Titebond 3 liberally and stack them together angled side to angled side until I have two stacks roughly similar in size. Now, had I been thinking about it at the time, I would have sprinkled some salt on these glued surfaces because that would give them a little bit of gription. I'm certain that's a word. Gription. Now that I have both stacks glued up, I clamp them together with large clamps. But if I only clamp the wood, the angled nature of the boards and the slippery glue would just make everything slide apart as I add clamping pressure. To address this issue, I wrap 4 metal slotted bars in wax paper so they don't adhere to my slabs, and place 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, and clamp those together as cawls to keep everything in place while the glue sets up. I'm not 100% sure, but I think those bars I'm using are designed to suspend HVAC equipment overhead in commercial spaces. In any case, I found them at Home Depot and bought them specifically for this purpose, and they work great. I let these slab glue-ups set up overnight. The reason I made 2 smaller slabs instead of one large one from the get-go is that my thickness planer is only 13.5 inches wide, and I knew I wanted my body blank to be at least an inch wider than that. So I kept the pieces separate as long as I could to make the whole process as easy on myself as possible. Now the time has come to join the two forever in unholy matrimony, or whatever. Once again, I apply a generous amount of PVA glue to both sides to ensure a solid bond. I only use one set of cawls this time, as I only need to ensure that one joint stays put. It's much less squirrely than trying to keep 40 slippery boards lined up. Once again, I left this glue joint to set up overnight. Now it's time to flatten the newly unified slab with my router and sled. I didn't want to thin the two halves with my planer any more than I did because I couldn't guarantee how they would behave when being glued up, and I feared creating a situation where I would have to thin the blank too much just to get things flat if it didn't go as planned. In the end, I worried about that for nothing, but I'm generally a better safe than sorry guy in most cases. The body blank flattening process takes several light passes rather than one or two heavy ones. If I'm being honest, the router is a terrifying tool to use in practice. If you can't imagine the bit biting too deeply and violently ripping the tool out of your hands and tossing itself and a couple of your fingers across the shop, you probably shouldn't be using one. On the other side of the danger spectrum, you've got the mild-mannered random orbital sander. My digits feel safe once again as I smooth out the grooves created by the router bits in the flattening process. We'll be seeing the router again real soon, but for now I can unpucker, center my chi. Now I'm trimming off the edges of the blank and squaring it up, and this is a completely unnecessary operation, and admittedly it's very likely just a bit of undiagnosed autism. I cut off all but about 1/4 of an inch of wood surrounding the outline of my Telecaster shape in an effort to deter the wrath of my trim router when following the template. It really is all about not making the router try to remove too much material in one pass. Patience means you get to keep your fingers. Have I mentioned how incredibly dangerous woodworking can be? When it comes to removing rough edges and refining the body's shape, nothing comes close to the oscillating belt sander. It removes the burns in the wood left behind by the cheap router bits I used to buy, and the tabletop is great for keeping the sides completely square to the top and bottom. I didn't get any video of it, but I drilled out the bulk of the neck pocket, the pickup, and control cavities before using the plunge router to achieve the final body cavity routes. I had a nice Telecaster neck laying around from a parts caster build that just never was, but it was a hair bigger than the neck pocket was routed for, so I filed and sanded to sneak up on a nice tight fit. You know, for the tone. I ended up needing to route my cavities slightly deeper to accommodate the components that I compiled for this build. I had plenty of thickness to work with, and I just wanted to make sure nothing felt crammed in there. As you can likely imagine, sanding is very important on a project like this, especially if you plan to go with a natural finish, and I did. So there was an absolutely insane amount of sanding, from grit 80 all the way up to about 320 as I recall. Random orbital sanding, hand sanding, sanding the sanding, sanding, and also sanding. While I recorded the finishing process, I must have used the wrong settings on the camera, and it just wasn't worth including on this video. I did about 6 coats of an oil-based wipe-on polyurethane, and I was incredibly pleased with how it turned out. I didn't have exactly the right Forstner bit to drill out the jack hole, so I ended up having to use a rat tail file to increase the diameter enough to accept the jack. I drilled the holes for the through body string system. I installed the metal ferrules to hold the ball ends of the strings. I installed some very nice locking tuners on the headstock. Next, I shielded all the body cavities with some conductive copper tape to prevent any electrical interference from external sources. The tape is a pain, so when I've used it up, I'll switch to a conductive paint going forward. I ran a short wire to connect the tape between body cavities for continuity to ground. And I installed the bridge pickup, making sure that all the components will be properly grounded. In case I haven't made it obvious, grounding is very, very important here. I'm doing one last dry fit just to ensure that all my screw holes line up properly. And finally, I'm doing all the solder joints that would have made my life more difficult if I had done them any sooner. I hope you had at least as much fun watching this as I had making it. It'd be lovely if you'd like it and subscribe to my channel. Thanks!